So we're really quite excited to have this session today. It's been a while in the making. So thanks, Lea, for being here. Lea is one of the founders of Letzte Generation Germany and is also currently writing a PhD on civil resistance. So without further ado, over to you, Lea, and thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you for the nice introduction. So exciting to meet you all. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about political jiu-jitsu, smart repression, and democracy today. So it's a lot on our schedule. And at the beginning, I wanted to ask how many of you are familiar with the concept of political jiu-jitsu and smart repression. Maybe you can just raise your hand when you've heard of it already. All right, so 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's good because I was a bit afraid that you all already know what I'm going to talk about. Cool. So I'm just going to start with the political jiu-jitsu bit. I think that's one of the most basic dynamics for me for civil resistance, and also one of the most important ones. So when we started Letzte Generation, we're working with this from the beginning on, and I think it's one of our keys to the successes that we had. So when you ask the question, what is political jiu-jitsu? You could define it as a situation in which there is an attack on peaceful protesters that is actually counterproductive for the attackers and generating more support for the protesters and for their cause, because what we usually have, and like also in the literature, but also in media and politicians, how they are framing it, is that they're thinking or having the assumption that violence is more powerful than non-violent means. And we all know this, we know the magic of non-violence. That's why we're doing our campaigns, but also when violence and non-violence are kind of facing each other, and non-violence can be more successful. So the usual assumption would be that when there is violence against peaceful protesters, it's crushing the protest movement. But that's actually a false assumption, and it's flawed, and it shows that the idea that violence is kind of better than non-violence is flawed, because even though non-violence is very vulnerable and weak, it can be and can turn such a powerful thing because of political jiu-jitsu. And that's what I'm going to talk about now, that, you know, the name is coming from the sports jiu-jitsu. It's a martial arts in which the opponent's momentum and force are used against them. So a person, you've probably heard of it, can use jiu-jitsu to win a fight against a bigger and stronger person by using kind of their strengths against them. And as we all know, when we're having our nonviolent campaigns, there's always oppression, and that's hard, you know, seeing people getting beaten up or getting arrested. Or I've just heard in the introduction that one of your phone calls are being listened to and stuff like this. They are all like forms of repression, and the government is using repression because of two reasons. First, they want to punish disobedience, obviously, and they want to prevent further disobedience and send this as a personal warning. And it can vary, of course, in the nature and intensity, from mild to lethal, and also in frequency, and from occasional to everyday. And at this point, I also want to say that, you know, in Germany, I think we're really lucky, because compared to other countries where the repression is way harder than in Germany, I think it's still very mild. And I just want to raise awareness, you know, that I'm not claiming that we're getting the worst repression here in Germany, and that there are always differences between different countries, and definitely between democracies and autocracies. That's just something very important to keep in mind. But how it works is that the police is often using force against nonviolent protesters, and this actually creates this very unequal situation and this asymmetry that nonviolent resistors can use against their opponents. So it's kind of like throwing the opponent off balance politically, because their repression is used against them, so their position is actually weakened, while our position is actually strengthened. So I think that's a really, really important point, to not be afraid of the repression, but see it as something that you can use to actually strengthen your own movement. And to win third parties and mobilize more. So maybe when we talk later about the different examples, maybe that you've experienced, I can also share some of the things that happened in Germany, you know, when there was some kind of repression and we used it and actually mobilized so many more people. Our fundraising was like going up there, and yeah, it's really a tool that you can use to kind of get the regime's allies and mobilize support for your own movement. I think the really important thing is that you stay non-violent. So that's the thing, how you can actually lose the political jiu-jitsu effect is when you become violent, because then it's kind of weakened and nullified. So it's really important that even in the worst situation of repression, you stay non-violent so that the backfiring effect can actually happen. And there are many kind of tips on how you can prepare for political jiu-jitsu, how you, like what you can do when it's happening, the oppression, and also how you work with it afterwards. And there's a really good guideline on Canvasopedia from Otpo, maybe you know it. I'm just going to share it in the chat. I think it would take too much space to talk about it now, how you actually do it in practice. But my number one tip, I would say, is to always make it visible. So to have someone, when repression is occurring, to have it filmed on camera, and also to share it afterwards, to make it public on your social media accounts, to make it public to the press that this is like happening. And maybe if you go to the document, you see other things that kind of help you to prepare and be aware and, yeah, be ready for kind of the oppression. And the point that I wanted to make with this political jiu-jitsu bit is that capitalizing the oppression that the government is giving us, and especially when your campaign is growing more successful, there will be more repression by the government because they will feel more threatened. And seeing this as an opportunity and as an important skill for nonviolent protesters, I think is really important. But the thing is, it's not always working. So even if there is repression, it's not always immediately triggering this backfiring effect. Sometimes, and in some cases, there was police repression, police force, but there weren't any consequences out of that. And that leads me to my second point, being smart repression. So what is smart repression? It's a set of coercive tactics that the government uses to suppress protest without activating this backfiring effect. So it's actually really interesting that they're having these mechanisms and dynamics that they develop to eliminate this backfiring effect, or they're trying to prevent it. Because what happened over the last centuries, it's something that you can see in the literature, is that governments are also becoming smarter, and they're learning from what we're doing, and they're improving their methods and their tactics to deal with protesters. So we're now living in kind of an age of this smart repression, whereas before we were just having the usual repression. The states noticed, okay, it's not just working when we repress them as we did, because that's going to create a huge outrage. So we need to be smarter about this. The important thing is that the same repression is still happening. So it's not that they become less repressive. It's just that they're creating a climate of soft repression that's facilitating the hard repression. So when you think about it, never forget that they're actually still as repressive as before, but they're just, you know, making it in a smarter way. So there's one really nice image that you can think of, and it's like an iron fist in a velvet glove. So it's actually, an iron fist is like really hard when it hits you, you know, it hurts. It's directed at the protesters. It's very unpleasant, but it's in this like very nice velvet glove, which is like very soft and looks really nice. And that's everything the people outside of the protest can see. So for them, it's not really like a big thing. It looks okay, but actually what they're doing is a really mean and yeah, really bad thing to the protesters. So that's a really interesting situation that we're in now, that not only the protesters have learned a lot, but also that governments have learned a lot and stepped up their game. So if you look at it in more detail, what they're actually doing, you can summarize 5 methods that kind of like are the common way in which they are doing smart repression. So it's first covering up the action, second, devaluing the target, third, reinterpreting events by lying or minimizing consequences, blaming others or reframing, fourth, using official channels to give an appearance of injustice, and fifth, intimidating and rewarding people. So what they're really good at in Germany is to devalue us in our campaign and stigmatizing us. And they're really good at drawing away the attention from our main cause, which is climate crisis and lack of democracy, and moving it to our identity as protesters and stigmatizing and criminalizing us. And they're also, I wouldn't say necessarily that's so much the case in Germany, but they're hiding their actions, so the repression that they're actually doing. So yeah, that's something that you can argue about. But that's one of the methods that's kind of like listed. But they're labeling us as terrorists, as traitors, as coup plotters, to just drum up fears. They're also always saying, you know, we're gonna radicalize ourselves, so we're gonna become violent at some point. Whereas in every interview that we're giving, we're saying, you know, we believe in nonviolence. It's the most strategic and most moral thing to do. We will never, or make sure that we will never become violent. That's not a good idea. But they're still saying, you know, you will become an uncontrollable group. So they're really good at this framing better, and at the same time framing their action as very positively and putting themselves in a very nice light. So they're actually instrumentalizing this debate about national security and counterterrorism, which is, when you think about it, so sad, because you have like this very important issue of the climate crisis, and all that they talk about is like us as terrorists and as a national security threat. So very smart and very annoying for us, but yeah, something that we need to be aware of. And they're also using this to make harder laws and harder restrictions against us. So, you know, they're using this threat that they've created of us to legitimize to have stricter laws against us and against the protest. They also take people to court and make it look like everything is like we're the criminals, and they're suing the individuals. It's going to be a lot of effort and expenses for the people going to court, and it's also wearing down the resistance. So it's just a very long and draining process. So the question is, how can we outsmart the government smart repression? That's actually kind of, yeah, the biggest point where we lack the knowledge in the literature. So everything that I was thinking of is from practice, but there isn't really much literature on how you can actually do this. So I'm also really curious for the discussion to hear what your thoughts are on this. There's just Brian Martin, one of the researchers, saying that there are also 5 methods when you look at the 5 methods that they're using for smart repression for increasing outrage is exposing the action, validating the target, interpreting the events as an injustice, mobilizing support, and resisting intimidation and rewards. So what they're suggesting is, you know, when these things come up, make it a discussion about censorship, about free speech, about democracy. That's also something I'm going to talk about later. So use these things that are coming up and not accepting it, but kind of say, no, we need to have a discussion about, you know, what you're doing. It's not right. It's our right to protest. So also organizing discussions about this to raise awareness of your rights and of the freedoms that you have. And also raise concerns when they put restrictions on your rights. So when they're trying to put in place a new law or a new rule against you, you know, you should definitely say that this is not an okay thing to do, and yeah, talk about it. It's also important to try to win this framing better and deframe the government's efforts. So when they're trying to delegitimize you, you should present yourself as a group that's just standing up for your rightful demands, that has a legit cause that you're protesting. It's also really helpful when you have, mothers, older people, people with low income jobs, like telling their stories, because they're usually more believed in, and they don't really like have a vested interest. So it's like really good if you have different people speak for your campaign, to really show, we're not the bad guys, we're actually the good guys, and we're just trying to do some good in this world. And yeah, you should try to get the government to reverse the laws that they're trying to put in place to censor you. And it's always good to have good networking going and appear as a united group against them. So in Germany, what we've tried to do is to do really good networking with the church. I know there's lots of criticism about the church that I also have personally, but it really helped, when they were trying to criticize us and kind of label us as criminals, to have people from the church speak up and say, that's not okay, that's not an okay thing to do, because it helped us to gain our legitimacy. So for the third part, I'm just going to talk a bit about the democratization debate, because that's, I think, one of the ways in which we are trying to address the smart repression, because, as I was saying, one of the big things that they're trying to do is to, the German politicians, is to label our protest as anti-democratic and say, what you're doing is going against our democracy, and that's not right, and you're a threat to our democracy. So what we started to do, I think, a month before Christmas, was just really go into this debate and say, it's actually quite nice that you bring up this democratic point, because it's an important issue. So let's really talk about the democratic deficits that we have right now here in Germany. Because I knew, I was talking to my research group before, that there's no academic text that's saying that civil disobedience or civil resistance is anti-democratic. Like, all the literature is showing that it's connected to the history of most of our democracies, that it's connected to most of the democratic rights that we got, that they are often democratic demands that these protesters have, that there are strategies from the government to kind of keep protesters small, and that there are just any text that they could use to say, it's anti-democratic. So it was just the media and the politicians making this up and saying, you're anti-democratic. So what we were trying to do was to turn this debate around. Also in our interviews, we had a press conference where I was like trying to make this argument and say, thank you for bringing this up. What's really dangerous about our democracy is that politicians are conveying the feeling that we live in a perfect democracy, that nothing is wrong, that citizens are not allowed to question whether something is wrong, and that you assume that, this is the best bit of democracy that we already have. Whereas what we should do is say, democracy is always on a spectrum, and there can be more democracy and less democracy. And we're nowhere in the world we are in a perfect democracy. So let's look at Germany, how it is here, and look at our current democracies. And when you think about what it really is, it's actually quite rude that they're using the word democracy, because it's so far away from its origin, what we have in Germany right now. When you think about it, democracies in ancient times were characterized by randomized elections. So the citizens were selected randomly and then could participate to, in this democracy, to have people from every kind of group, every age, different backgrounds involved. And politicians today are using this word and just legitimizing their own elections and being based on elections every 4 years. And that's not so democratic, right? Having elections every 4 years. And then after that, the politicians are just governing how they want. There are no rules. There's a huge lobby in Germany, and it's really hard for the citizens to be heard. So we should actually separate the word democracy from what we have right now in Germany, because they're not really listening to the citizens there. So what we were trying to do was to say, yes, we do have a democratic deficit, but it's one where the government is really undemocratic because they're not listening to the citizens, and it's time to hold the governments accountable. And also saying that, you know, you're wrong and saying we are anti-democratic because you're always saying we don't have the majorities, but we do have the majorities. They're just not listened to you and they're blocked by what you want. And this was like really good for us because we had this very low-key demand of having like a €9 ticket for public transport and the speed limit on the highways. So everyone was like, of course people would vote for this. It's just, you know, so obvious that the politicians and the political parties are blocking this for their own interest. So yeah, we were trying to ask them the question, why don't you let the citizens decide, you know, what they want? Are you afraid that that they would vote for it? You know, if you think it's so democratic here, why don't you just, you know, let the citizens vote? So what I'm trying to say also with this is that you shouldn't be afraid of the smart repression and when the government is labeling you as anti-democratic or as terrorist or stuff like this, because you're always able to turn it around and to win this argument and this debate and set a new agenda. And I think I'm gonna stop for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. So I don't know if all of you, should we start with the questions, Leah, that you sent me? Maybe we sent them to all the groups. Rodri, have you got them on Signal? Because I don't have Signal on this laptop to post them in the chat here, maybe for everyone. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll do.
And obviously now I was looking at my phone and I have no idea whether Lena or Francesca raised the hand first.
It was a plus.
Oh, just
the talk.
So the questions are in the chat that we posted before on the Signal groups. So whether anyone is noticing or has experienced Jiu-Jitsu already in their campaign, regarding their campaign, what dynamics of smart repression are you noticing and how can you deal with that? So I guess maybe first it's more a bit of like a roundup or a go around of what's been happening in your countries and in your project, and then we'll take it from there. So if anyone wants to say anything to one or all of these 3 points, then do raise your hand. And if not, if somebody has a question, that's also okay. We can start with that.
Connie, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. Do you want us to say how we've been experiencing that kind of smart repression ourselves? And we could just, you can maybe just pick on someone and we'll just start off doing it. Maybe I'll start.
Maybe you start, Sarah, as you're already speaking. Yes.
Damn. Okay, well, I think what Leah outlined, you can see quite clearly in the way that our right-wing press and not just the Conservative Party in the UK, but also the Labour Party in the UK have responded to us. So there's always that link. They do where they will, you know, they'll explain what you've done and then they'll have some commentator saying, I'm really worried that people may become more extreme in the future, you know, or they'll then go on to some, or maybe linked to something violent that's happened. So they're not saying that you've done it, but if you casually read it, you might see, you can start making the link between what we're doing as a campaign and an organisation and violence. So that's quite key, trying to make us appear violent. They like, obviously, if we any damage that we've done, property damage, that's always really, really highlighted. They highlight a lot that we've damaged artworks. Like that's quite a common motif, even though we haven't actually damaged any artworks yet. But they will, but they like claiming that a lot. So that they like painting us as anti-democratic, that we're selfish, that we're doing this for our own ends. All of that stuff is happening, and so you can see that once you know to look for it, that's smart repression. You can see it taking place. But I guess, you know, to a certain extent that has always happened. They have so far managed mostly to restrain themselves from locking us all up, unless we have. There's been a couple of cases where we've actually blatantly broken court injunctions, where the court has almost had the court rather than the state. So procedurally, they've had no option other than to lock up a lot of people. But as soon as they got in front of a judge, they were basically all freed. So at one point, we had 52 people in prison because of a procedural anomaly. But as soon as those people were in front of the judge just let them all out. They just went, no, don't, you know, what's going on. So we've currently got 13 people in prison at the moment. The courts are using a lot, the government is using a lot of injunctions against us rather than criminal law, which is almost like a form of corporate law. So companies get injunctions saying you are not allowed to do this, and then as soon as you break that law, you're hauled up immediately in front of court, and they can impose quite hefty penalties on you, hefty financial penalties. And in some ways, that's a lot more successful at stopping people acting. The idea of financial penalties and loss is a greater stops people more than being sent to prison, and that stops people a lot more. So and then we've also got this pushback as well on a legislative level, where we've got new laws coming in because of Insulate Britain, because of Just Stop Oil. And I got a call today from a journalist, because the Prime Minister's spokesperson today has said that they're looking at how to stop us walking down the road, because that was our last month of protest, was basically just walking slowly down the road, and they're considering how they can stop us doing that now. So they're using smart repression, but they're also, I think, going to end up looking foolish at some point when they're going to, you know, ban groups going to watch fireworks are in danger of, you know, of breaking the law. So I don't know how they're going to ban pedestrians from walking down the highway, because it literally is, you know, what the road is for. So I think that's going to be really interesting, and we could possibly have a lot of fun with that, seeing just how far we can push it. That's me done. Indy, do you want to add anything to that?
I could do, but maybe hear from other campaigns.
Yeah, pass on to, well, Colleen, do you want to pass it on?
Thanks, Sarah, for that update, and also about we haven't destroyed any artwork yet. Yeah, happy to pass on to someone. I'm just going to pick someone. So I'm just going to pick Helen in Sweden, and then Helen, you pass it on to someone.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, in Sweden, the legal system, already almost from day one, the crime suspicion in Sweden has been sabotage, which could mean up to 4 years in prison. And this made it really difficult for us to mobilize, because that scared people away. So, but at the same time, those people that signed up from the beginning, and a few more that were added, we continued to do our 3 waves anyway. But what we see now is that it's not. I think there in some way overloaded the legal system, because now these crime suspicions, they are suddenly, if you already have been convicted for sabotage, then they just let go of several of these other accusations. So I think that could be, we could interpret that as sort of a backlash for the legal system, that they suddenly drop all these trials that were supposed to come up. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. What else to say? Well, we also have this situation of both politicians and writers in newspapers, and this discussion of like claiming that we are terrorists. So this is actually something that we need to face a bit more. We are not many people working in Återställ våtmarker, so we have the difficulties we have is that we just don't have time to handle all these different situations, and we should be quicker with response. And I'm actually sitting here thinking of that since we are not many, we have to start to prioritize what to put effort on. And actually, there was this article today in the newspaper where there is a new law coming up where they are allowed, and they are mentioning and asked the pictures of Återställ våtmarker, and they will start to listen to our conversations, I guess, both on computers and mobiles. So the repression is still growing. And the problem is we really have to think about how we should own that discussion in the newspapers and hopefully on public television. But we're not there yet. It's really hard to when you're so few people to handle the situation. Alfred, would you like to say something else?
Not much, but I would sum it up that we don't have had so much repression in Sweden, just possibly because I compare it to more southern countries which do not have so much democracy, like Iran, for example. But yeah, they are definitely smarter in these northern democracies. So we don't see the repression, and we are so used to not be willing to sacrifice ourselves. So they know that they don't have to have so much repression to scare away all the activists. They could say like, yeah, you're going to have a big penalty, pay a lot of money if you go on smash the windows of a bank, for example, or have the prison scare thing. I just wanted to highlight what you said about this, that the punishment went away from the sabotage, Liam. I think that's not so much that they have changed. It's just a matter of this penalty relief that we got in Sweden. So if you are fined for a big crime, they drop all the other charges. I think I thought about when the smart repression here is that they don't want it to be shown on video or photographs when they are, for example, they would never hit a person. The police would never hit the person or kick a person in Sweden, but they would use like police holdings, like this one, for example, when they're carrying away people and stuff like that. So I think we are kind of used to that they're doing that, but it's still really fucking painful. So what we could do is be more active on trying to get those pictures when the police is like, ha ha ha, going like this on the face, but like twisting the wrist of the activists and saying like, yeah, we see what you're doing. It's not okay. Yeah, about that. So I pass it to Lena. Stop all your thing.
Yes, maybe I can just add one thing to that, because I actually wanted to give you some hope that I know it's like really hard when you're such a small group, and especially in the beginning of this protest, you're trying to mobilize more and more people. And it's just like such a draining process that I experienced that political jiu-jitsu is one of the quickest way to mobilize people. So I think what we were trying to do when we were planning our strategies is to think, okay, which is the most oppressive place in Germany right now where we could go to? That's where we're going to. It's like a bit from what Martin Luther King was trying to do in Alabama. You know, we've probably heard of it, like with this Bull Connor police officer who was like really, really hard on the protesters, and they knew that, so they like picked this place on purpose. Yeah, so to have this accounted for in your plan, that you know there will be a phase of oppression, and that's you do this, and that's where you can mobilize the most. Or if you don't have a place like this, think, okay, when we think of all the people that we have in our movement right now, if one of them would experience this repression, like what would make the biggest outcry to maybe think this way? Because I definitely think when violence is put against women, especially older or younger women, I think it has like a huge effect on the general population. And I think that's also a way to get lots of people going. What we did was to, like the past couple of weeks, was to put people in prison in Munich. So we knew that this was the most oppressive state, like federal state in Germany. So we tried to mobilize people who were willing to take that risk to go there. And then also when, you know, they had a new law that they were putting out there for us, we were prepared for that, and we knew that we would have to go again. And then that's also always a nice thing that I just wanted to add is, you know, when there's like the biggest situation of fear that they're trying to create is to use laughtivism and to make something that's fun, you know, because they don't really expect that when they're trying to really scare you away, and then you just come there and make something that's fun. So what we did was to have huge buckets of glue that people were like throwing over them and kind of like being in them, because they were making this law to not use like the glue on streets anymore. So we just doubled that and made this like huge, and it actually worked because people are seeing through this. They're seeing that they're trying to just, you know, repress protesters that have a right and good cause, and it's just ridiculous that they're making these laws. So yeah, maybe you can think of how you can include this dynamic in your plans if you just haven't yet.
Thanks, Leah. So Lena just wrote she has to quickly change a train seat. So if somebody else wants to go next, I don't know, Cecile, do you want to have a crack?
Yes, I can try. So when I think about our campaign and how it worked until now, I think this is very known in Switzerland that we are so slow, and repression is also very, very slow. And actually, I think it's also very smart because like they're always very nice. Also during when there is never violence coming from the police. They do it very well. They're really nice, and I think they've learned from XR and other movement, and they know how we work, and they're very smart. I just think about when I participated in one action, and then the police came and they took some people that they carried people from the road, and then there were some journalists, and then the journalists went, and then when the journalists were gone, they said, okay, now you can walk, you don't have to be carried, because they kind of know that this is something we do to show like vulnerability and stuff like this. So they really have a So what they do is they most of the time also cover up the action, so we can take no pictures from them when they carry the people. Also in the way they talk about the actions, like there's this thing about democracy, and of course Switzerland is the best democracy in the world, so you cannot do this. And then there's also this big thing around just blocking road, like it's the wrong target, you're antisocial because you're blocking normal people who are doing their best. So we are the bad people, being bad against the good people. And so and then about more like the legal consequences of the action. So it's so slow. I've participated in, like, I've been arrested for the first time, I think almost 3 years ago, and I've never received any penalty order or anything. And then I've been arrested almost like 10 times and I've never received anything about that. So it's like just going so long. And it's good because you can continue, but then you have nothing to say about repression. And when you receive something, it's like you pay a lot. And it's so complicated. It takes so much energy to go into trial. So most of the people, they pay, but I agree with, like Sarah, you said that this is the worst thing, like really. And I think it's true that people are more scared. What represses them more is like paying a lot of money rather than going into prison. And I think they know that. And the more you go, the more you have to pay. So yeah, I think it's slow and vicious also, I feel. Yeah, so for the moment, I don't have a lot to say about how we manage this, because actually we haven't quite nothing to do because we're still waiting for things to happen, like the repression and legal consequences.
Can I just ask a quick question? Because what happens in your country when you push again and again? So when you're like on the street and you go again and again, are they still kind of friendly towards you, or how does it change?
Yeah, so the thing is that we have different, the police is, you have the state police, but they come only if you go like in for example in the capital, in buildings from the places from the state. Then you have the canton police, which is also from the like the different places you have, and they're completely disconnected from one another. So this means that if you should go again and again in the same town, because you also have the town police. And we went again and again in the same town, and they were still, at least with Switzerland, they were still nice and always quicker. And they had their blue pack. So I think it's really, for the moment, they stayed nice. Yeah. Maybe Robin has something to add.
Yes, maybe just a positive note on what's happening in Switzerland as well is that we do have allies in politics. Like, for instance, in one of the cities where we go all the time, Lausanne, the Minister of Security, he's from the Green Party, and he said officially in the media that he didn't want to repress us. So, I mean, not only sending a strong message, but it's also, I mean, good in a sense for us. We cannot reuse the repression then, but I mean, it's best if we don't have repression at all. So it means we can go more often. And also, I think we could meet. Yeah, maybe Leah, you could you could develop on that. Maybe it's not true what I say. Also, we could meet one right-wing politician at the national level who often takes the floor against us, saying we are eco-terrorists and stuff. And I think that being able to meet them in private can kind of, I don't know, the discourse might change afterwards. So it's not using the opposition strategy, it's more trying to find a consensus kind of by talking with them. But if they can relate to you, like emotionally, because they know you, they know your face, they know how you speak and stuff, maybe they will not use the bad words against you anymore, because they know it's not true. So it's either they will lie very strong, and I know politicians are used to do it, but it's going to be more difficult for them to lie once they've known you and they know you're not a terrorist at all, just a normal citizen. Yeah.
Yes, maybe I can just add to that. By the way, I'm not taking any pleasure in any repression because I'm like trying to make a case that we should, use this. It's always hard on a personal level to see, your friends and people that you're close with getting hurt and stuff. So I do think it's not an easy thing to do, but just on a strategic level, I think it's very important for the movement. So that's a very important point that I wanted to make, because I was nodding or disagreeing with your point, just because we have like this rule in our campaign that the people who are going on the streets should try to get to be arrested as quickly as possible, because for us the kind of worst case is if they go and then they wait in the with the police, and then maybe they go later this afternoon again, because what we're trying to do is to push them. So when you are on the streets and they're kind of like carrying you off the street, to immediately go again, like very slowly, not running, just very peacefully. And then usually they take you off a second time, but when you do it a third, a fourth, a fifth time, they get like really angry, like even the very nice police men and women. And that's when you get the pictures of the police dragging you away and arresting you. And I think that's like one of the mechanisms that we use to quickly escalate our actions that we do on the streets. So we actually try to use this a lot, because Cici, what you were saying with the nice police guys, we also have some of them who are just really nice, but we managed always to kind of push them to the edge, not because we're not taking any personal pleasure in this. I think it's just better to have these pictures and to have the outrage of people watching the protests.
Maybe I can just add something. It just makes me think about the actions we had and if it was possible to do that. And I think in many cases it was just not possible, because they did everything so that you cannot go back. Like they come and they're 20, or they close the space, or I'm just thinking about that, and I think it's another method of smart repression, not to give you the opportunity to go back then on the road. But it's true, when it happened once, it became more violent.
Lena, are you ready?
Yes, thank you for skipping me. I think in Norway it's a bit of a similar situation to Sweden. Like we don't experience that hard repression, but also still a bit. What we've experienced last year was also strip searching, which is maybe sometimes a daily business in other countries, but we managed to make quite a big media story also out of it. So that actually only happened one time, but gave us still like this attention in the media. I think it didn't make us make more people join us, but at least it created more sympathy for us. And then we also had one case where an activist, where the police tried to get the driver's license of an activist and keep it. And they also media is kind of interested in this kind of stories. So I think we're in kind of a lucky situation that media really wants to investigate those situations and the misbehavior of the police, and really tries to put effort in that. And even people from the parliament had to give a statement on those incidences. In the summer action period, we experienced that we got a court date as quickly as possible, just 3 days after we got the fine, which was crazy. Our lawyer said she never experienced that before, and I think it was also trying to intimidate us. But then when we came back in autumn, we experienced kind of the opposite of it. So we got never any fine, never any information of like if we're getting fined for what we're getting fined, no matter which kind of action it was, no matter in which city it was. So that that changed a lot. Like first half of the year we got fines and court dates immediately, and now we don't get any information on the consequences. So maybe a bit like Switzerland now that we don't really know what's going, like what we have to expect in a way. I think also because the court dates turned out to be like another big story for media when they were like just a few days after the elections. And then another repression that we maybe experienced was that undercover policemen started to follow us, and then people that have been on the action side like repeatedly were just arrested for just being there and not taking action. So suddenly people in green roles also got arrested. And that was kind of almost impossible to make visual because they were just like people were just standing on the sidewalk or something, and suddenly undercover cops said like, please arrest them too. I think that's it from Norway so far. Maybe Frida wants to add something, but I think that's all I can think of now.
I think you summed it up in a good way, Lena. I think also like a lot of the problem is like with the media stuff again, that like they really try to frame us as like the bad guys and like pushing the environmental engagement into society in the wrong direction. That probably the same as we see in your papers too. But I don't think I have anything else to add.
Thank you, Frida. Bea, I don't know if you're able to speak. Maybe an update from you in Italy.
Yeah, I should, but I'm on a train, so tell me if you don't hear me. Regarding smart repression, I guess that I already spoke a lot about the police always following us, and it's pretty funny and frustrating at the same time because I think that in October they discovered all our houses after 2 days, and then it became like a play between us and them on how many people managed to escape the house without being arrested and how many were arrested and this kind of thing. Then when we threw paint at La Scala Theater, for example, they wrote to the press and said that they were hurt, like that we were violent towards them, but I think that maybe they just fell while taking us, or their shoulder was hurting, or this kind of things, but they depicted us as violent people. And then, I know it's not a smart repression kind of thing, but I guess that a lot of illegal repression is going to come for Italian people, like maybe the police or someone who is paid or like has contact with them that follow you by night and try to intimidate you. I guess it's a measure that is going to come quite soon to a lot of people because they don't have a legal way to really repress us quickly. Regarding point 1, I think that you saw as the second day of the year. So we had this guy, Simone, who's going to be on trial tomorrow, and he's receiving, I don't know, but the police tried to take him to trial and ask the judge to give him a special surveillance, which is a measure which is given only to mafia organizations or someone who is really dangerous. And the point is that it's not because of the actions he did, so it's not a conventional trial. It's just the police that judges your behavior as a political person and asks the judge to take measure against you. So I think that the attention was already growing, and then after the action against the Senate, we had 3 young people arrested. So not just taken to the police station, but in Italy we say arrested when you spend a night in prison and then you directly go to the judge the next morning. So this was a backfire for them, I guess, because a lot of people were really angry against the state, and a lot of public people maybe made a statement in support of us, or said, okay, well, they're not blocking the roads now, they're not throwing soup against the painting, and now you say that they are criminal. But this time I agree with them. So it was really a mass mobilization against the government and all the political people. And now a lot of other movements and realities are just coming to support, maybe in a passive way at first, but also they want to organize streets for us, and they want to join our actions maybe in a lower, in a milder level than blocking roads, but still they are like giving themselves to us. So it's going positive. And I'll pass to, I think that the French are missing.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's here anymore. Alizé was here, but not anymore. But I don't know, Rach, do you want to say what's happened so far in New Zealand?
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting listening to you all. We've only done 1 action phase so far, but already we noticed some things quite different to other protests that we've been involved in. For example, everybody getting charged, even if it's their very first time getting arrested. That's never really happened for protests before. Also, this idea of shuffling back onto the road after you've been removed, they very quickly, I think after our first action, they handcuff us to the barrier at the side of the road, so we can't go anywhere. So that's a bit of a different strategy. So we've got 19 people facing trials, and most of those people multiple trials. So it's kind of a wait and see what happens. We don't know what's going to happen. And I guess the other kind of big thing that has happened is that the shadow minister, so the from the opposition party, who covers the transport portfolio, which is our target, he hates us very, very much, and has just put a members' bill into the parliamentary ballot to increase the penalties for motorway blocking very significantly. So I don't think that has any chance of being read. We have an election in September, whilst they are not the government, but it's very likely that this right-wing coalition of parties will become government in September. So we are imagining if that eventuates, things will change quite a lot. So we better get a few action phases in before September, I guess. So we're kind of just in the let's wait and see what happens. But yeah, interesting to hear those methods of smart repression. I think we definitely are seeing some of those devaluing the target. The politicians are all like, I don't know why you've chosen this target. This makes no sense at all, which starts to kind of make us question ourselves. So that is a pretty smart move. Yeah, that's it probably from me.
Thanks, Rachel. Does anyone else want to throw anything in, or somebody who hasn't, or a question or a comment on something somebody said? Or Leah, do you want to, was it just looking at the time? Because I think every project has gone now, every campaign. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, Leah, please.
Yes, maybe I can just address one final thing, because you were mentioning court cases a lot, and I think that's kind of a bit put into brackets, because I'm not sure if the political jiu-jitsu effect works with court cases, because as you were saying, it takes lots of time. So, you know, that's also what they're trying to do in Germany, especially with the money, to really give people fines and just have, I don't know, I have like 20 something court cases coming up. So it's like really demotivating, but I think that's why it's so key that you also think in your strategies, okay, where are moments where we can have this immediate exposure of this repression, because it's just not working with the court cases, what I'm trying to say. And to me, it sounds like, you know, because it's so different in the different countries, that you need to think, okay, what's the kind of repression that's could take place in our country, and then just push it. And it's like part of this process. Unfortunately, I think that the repressions are going to go up. So yeah, don't be scared when they come, and just, you know, be ready to embrace them and use them for you. And also, just one final thing I wanted to share, what we did when very strange things happened, you know, by the politicians or media. As some of you were saying, like people following us or just randomly arresting us, or there was this incident in Germany when they were trying to connect us to one of the accidents that's happened on the roads, and say, you know, it's like all our fault, and you are responsible for the death of this person, which we were not. Was to really call them out on this. So we had a press release saying, what the heck are you guys doing? You know, we know our system is screwed, but what you're doing right now is just like so respectless and so far away from, you know, what you should do. We're really shocked that this is happening. And this had like a really interesting effect, because I think we just uncovered what they were doing, and that really made them look bad. And there was lots of solidarity with us for that. But it's really hard, and I wish you all the best. And thank you for coming to the session. It's really nice meeting you.
I feel like maybe it's you know, good to maybe once in a while check in about this topic, because obviously every project is at a completely different state of their own development. Obviously different countries have completely different setups, how the government reacts to the first time of a roadblock, or, you know, the 25th time. So maybe let's bear this in mind. It's quite nice to also just have an exchange again at some point and see how has everyone been doing, you know, in 2 months, etc. Just to have a because I think it's really helpful to talk to each other about this topic as well, and not just, you know, action, mobilization, and, you know, that the usual stuff we do. Okay, one last, if anyone wants to share, say, ask, or just comment on anything before we maybe now do a checkout in the main room all together to say goodbye. Okay, nobody. So I'm just going to pick.
I can speak to one.
Bea?
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Was really interesting. Well, from my little experience here, I can say that like the strategy works, but every country has its own different culture and also way of the police to behave. So, for example, something that you said, I don't think it's possible here, or not possible, but it doesn't work. But there are a lot of things that work. So I think that everyone just should think about the legal way in his own country, and also for example, after these days, I also think that there is something cultural which is arriving here, and it's maybe different from you. So how the people react, how the different movements are reacting, and why, and how they speak one to each other. Yeah, for example, I see now that we are so small and like so narrow-minded at some point, but at the same time, everyone knows everyone. So if you maybe capitalize over some networks, then the mobilizations go really, really fast. So it's, yeah, I know it depends on the country, but it works. at the strategic level, it works, and it's amazing.
Thanks, Bea. Yeah, I think it's a really good end note. Obviously, I think one of the main reasons why we need to share and exchange with each other is because there is always the national context, the culture, the history, etc., etc. Yeah. So, and this is a good way of also learning. You know, what has worked somewhere might not somewhere else, but something else has. Yeah, and to broaden also our repertoire of how we deal with the same repression, maybe depending on cultural context. Okay, check out